Hi, everyone. As you are joining, we are so excited to get started tonight. We're going to give people a minute or two to jump in. As they do so, please do introduce yourself in the chat. Make sure to change your settings to all panelists and attendees, and then we'll be able to get started. And we're going to give everyone just another 30 seconds or so until we kick it to Abby to start tonight's event. But as you are here, please make sure to introduce yourself in the chat. Change your settings to all panelists and attendees so everybody can see. Tell us who you are, where you're watching from, and why you're excited to be here. Right. Oh, man. I see some people I know, some people I don't. I'm really pumped. It should be fun. Great. Abby, you want to kick us off as people are still joining?
Sounds good. Hi, Steve. I just saw Steve, right? And Steve is a great colleague of mine. Anyway, hi, everyone. Thank you guys all for spending an hour with us tonight. I know that screen fatigue is super real, so I really appreciate everyone sort of jumping on. I think it's going to be worth it. I'm Abby Pucker. I am a proud board member of Run for Something, and also just a general stan. I'm with my 96-year-old grandmother in outside of San Diego, and all she has been doing is talking about how horrible Trump is. And while I agree with the sentiment, it's like a lot. So I'm just very excited tonight to just be inspired and not talk about that and focus on what amazing locally elected officials are doing to actually make change and make the world and our country a better place. So without further ado, I am going to kick it to Amanda, who is the co-founder and executive director of Run for Something, and also one of my favorite humans in the entire world.
The feeling is deeply mutual. I am so grateful to Abby for pulling tonight's event together. I am Amanda Litman. I am one of the co-founders, along with Ross Morales-Raquetto, and the executive director of Run for Something. A quick agenda for this evening so you know what you're getting yourself into. I want to tell you a little bit about what Run for Something is and does and what we're focusing on this year. I'm then going to introduce our first speaker for this evening, Judge Lina Hidalgo. Because she can't stay throughout the entire night, we're going to have maybe a space for 1 or 2 questions for Judge Hidalgo before she has to bounce. I then will introduce our final 2 speakers. They will both give you a little bit of introduction to themselves, and the 2 of them plus myself will be here for questions and answers. Our goal is to end this in about an hour, so 9 o'clock East Coast. If you have any questions throughout that you think of that you want to ask, don't hesitate to drop them into the chat where Ross or someone else from our team can answer. If it's something you want to make sure that one of our speakers or myself gets to in front of everyone at the end, to use the Q&A function down below. Before I go into a little bit about Run for Something, for those of you who are new to us, I want to thank our host committee for this evening. Shewa Adekoya, Jeff Antebi, Daniel Dart, Allison and Michael Delman, Quinn Emmett, Anna Flickinger, Nora Gilbert, Michael Pollack, Elizabeth Goodstein, Michael Lewin, Maddie Hendricks, Laura Hyatt, Bobby Kohler, Adam Kopp, Zachary Lehner, Martha and Jeff Melvoin, Britton Rizzio, Stephen Sonoff, and Jessica Siegel, Grace Sara, and Ben Proudfoot, excuse me. Plus the inimitable Abby Pucker. Tonight is one of our most successful virtual fundraisers yet. That's because of you and your commitment to our work. So we are so unimaginably grateful. A little bit about Run for Something for those of you who are new to our team and to our organization. Run for Something was born of the ashes of the 2016 election. When shortly after November, I got a Facebook message from somebody I went to college with. Hey, Amanda, I want to run for local office because if Trump can do it, seems like anybody can. What do I do? And I did not have an answer for him because at the time, if you were young and newly excited about politics and wanted to do more than vote and more than volunteer, there was nowhere you could go that would help you. So I reached out to a whole bunch of people, one of whom became my co-founder, Ross Morales-Raquetto. And Ross and I wrote a plan and we built a website. And then on Inauguration Day, we launched Run for Something, an organization that would recruit and support young, diverse progressives running for local office. Ross and I genuinely thought this organization would be small. We'd get 100 people in the first year, we would take real jobs, what a cool hobby this would be. Instead, in the first week, 1,000 people signed up. And as of today, we're up to more than 58,000 young people all across the country who've raised their hands and told us they wanted to run for office. And my favorite thing about that number, about that 58,000, is that nearly 15,000 of them signed up in the last 6 months, which tells you something really important about what we're doing here. It was never about Trump to begin with, and it's really not about Trump now. People are signing up to run because they see a problem they want to solve and an office that would let them solve it. And they see an opportunity to lead. And we are so excited and honored and privileged to be a part of that process, to help them figure out how to turn that passion and enthusiasm and interest in making their community a better place into a campaign, a candidacy, and then an elected official like the three you're going to meet tonight who can actively make their communities better. We do a bunch of different parts of our program. The two big buckets are recruitment. So honestly, a lot of things like this, going to groups full of people and telling them they should run for office. We run ads, we do press, we do social media. And the biggest thing we can do is tell the stories of our candidates and alumni, knowing that they will inspire people like them to run too. It's hard not to hear stories like Judge Lina Hidalgo's or Senator Randall's, who you'll meet tonight, and think, oh, I, a young woman of color, reading the story, can see myself reflected in leadership. And that is so unimaginably important. You know, many of you work in media or in storytelling. We can't be what we can't see. So when especially young women, young people of color see themselves reflected in government, they're able to imagine themselves holding those positions and take the next step. The second part of our program is supporting people through their campaigns. We help people figure out how to get on the ballot, how to file, how to open a bank account, which is actually much harder than you could imagine. Things like how to get the voter file. What do you do once you have it? We work with hundreds of other organizations across the country to support candidates with whatever they need. We have a network of more than 500 mentors across the country who work with candidates one-on-one. My favorite part of our program is our alumni advisor community, where candidates up and coming get connected to folks who've run in the past, some won, some lost. Either way, what we have found is that being able to talk to someone who's gone through something just as hard as you have, who has been in your shoes before, is invaluable. We have connected college students running for office, parents, veterans, scientists, people running in rural districts, and people running in deep blue states, and made sure that they know they're not alone. They're part of a movement. The final thing we do as part of our support program is endorsements. You know, I mentioned we have 58,000 people in our pipeline. Obviously, we can't deeply engage with 58,000 people, so we've worked to winnow that down. We've had about 2,000 people apply for our endorsement over the last 3 years and endorsed more than 1,300 of them. Our 2020 class so far is about 521 people. It is 54% women, 48% Black, Indigenous, people of color, and 23% LGBTQ. There are folks running across 47 states plus DC. There are 67% of them are running for things like state house or state senate, 23% are running for municipal or county office, and the remaining 10% are split between education and law enforcement. Run for Something only works with young people under the age of 40, only works with progressives or Democrats, and only works with people running for those types of offices, for the things like school board, library board, city clerk, county clerk, justice of the peace, coroner, state house and state senate, city council, county council, you know, the real building blocks of the democratic process. And Abby said this before, we're not really going to talk about Trump tonight. We will, he'll come up as one does, but it's not about him. And I think that's a really important distinction. You know, the work that we do and that our candidates and alumni do and our electeds do is about community building. It's about sustainable power. It is about making sure that people, no matter wherever they are, have a representative in government who sees them, who connects with them, who is fighting for them, and who is willing to change their careers, as our candidates have, to make their voters, the voters' lives better. We have elected over the last 3 years, so not including this cycle, more than 310 people across 43 states plus DC. Those winners are similarly predominantly women, nearly half are people of color, nearly a fifth are LGBTQ+, and they are phenomenal. You know, usually when we do these events, I get to talk in, you know, great length, tell their stories about the work that they're doing, but we are so lucky tonight that instead of me talking all about them, they're going to get to tell their stories themselves. We are first going to hear from Judge Lina Hidalgo in Texas. I am so excited for you to meet her. Judge Hidalgo, when she was first elected in 2018, was only 27 years old. She's the head of Harris County's governing body. She's the first woman and first Latina to hold the position. When she won, she beat an 11-year Republican incumbent. Nobody thought Lina could win. Run for Something did. Ross, my incredible co-founder, was there every step of the way, especially making sure that Lina had what she needed to succeed. She is born in Colombia, moved to Texas with her family in 2005, attended Stanford, graduated in 2013. For same year, she became a citizen. She was studying law and public policy at Harvard and NYU when she first considered running for office. Then she moved home after graduating because she wanted to make Harris County a better place. She now runs the third largest county in America. She is, I will say this, maybe she won't, one of the most important elected officials in the United States. She is saving people's lives. She's one of the few elected officials in Texas taking the pandemic seriously. And not only that, multitasking, doing things like reforming the bail system, making it easier for people to vote, and providing homelessness initiatives, also while keeping people healthy and safe. I'm so excited for you to hear Judge Hidalgo's story. And then Judge Hidalgo, if you have a couple minutes to answer just a few questions from folks before you have to go, we would really love that. Take it away, Lina.
Oh,
I think you're still muted, my friend.
yeah, done. Got it. I'm so happy to join you guys and so grateful to you guys. It's a very difficult time and very much a turning point in our history. Right now we have young people, activists, moms on the streets out protesting the murders of Black and brown people. We have the terrible economic crisis that is hurting so many folks. We've got, of course, this pandemic, the likes of which we hadn't seen for 100 years. And we are recognizing more than ever the importance of local government. All of these battles are being fought at local governments. And so I think it's a particularly important time for the folks you guys support, for this group, and for everyone who is part of this to step up even more. When I decided to run for office, you know, it was after the 2016 election. I was one of the folks that always thought I was going to work outside the system. And I decided that I could do a lot more from within. I found this position that helps manage the budget for the third largest county in the country. And I knew that we could do better. And when I was elected, I had a lot of people who felt that a 27-year-old with no prior experience in politics couldn't do this. But what this crisis has shown is that that lack of experience as a politician is actually an asset, because you don't have people saying this can't be done, spending their time finding excuses for why we can't address difficult challenges. Instead, for us, these challenges are delicious, they're exciting, they're important. You know, Josh Pauly will hear from. The issue of police in schools is not new, and it took him to be there and address it. The issue of homelessness in college students, what the senator will be addressing and what she has worked on, that is something that, yes, it exists. And we just needed that fresh set of eyes and that boldness and that aggressiveness and compassion to take these kinds of things on. For our part, we've been in office 1.5 years at this point. I've been able to navigate and lead our community in Harris County through 3 major chemical fires, 2 major floods, now this pandemic. I've got 34 cities, including the city of Houston, around 5 million residents, about a $5 billion budget, Republicans and Democrats. And we're making it work. When the pandemic was beginning to show up around the country, we were the largest community that didn't have a major crisis, because early on we shut down bars and restaurants. When folks called me from the special interest groups and said, if you do this, you're gonna be you're not gonna be able to run for office again. I said, I didn't run to be here for 30 years. I ran to make good policy. And right now, this is what we need to do. And so we managed to stem the tide. We've been able to set up unbelievable contact tracing operation, support for our lowest income residents, not just the funds we got from the federal government, but local dollars that we've made available so that we could support undocumented immigrants and folks who don't receive federal aid. In the face of obstacles from different levels of government, we found our way around, and unfortunately, it's put our position in a tough place to have these mixed messages from other levels of government. But we're still pushing creatively these days, helping our superintendents do what they know they need to do, what they want to do, which is to keep the schools postpone in-person instruction until it's safe, to keep everybody safe. In the time we've been here, we addressed misdemeanor bail reform. We're working on felony bail. We've made the largest investment in 30 years in environmental protections in a community that floods seemingly every year, every other year. We've taken the taboo out of talking about climate change. We are the heart of the petrochemical industry, but we know that we need to be the future of energy and that we need to address climate change. We've come up with a new model for how to recover after every flood, how to prioritize not just the communities with the higher property values, but the communities where the most people are flooded out, where there's higher social vulnerability index, where there are environmental benefits to the projects we're doing. There was just a piece on that strategy this past week in the New York Times, and we have communities learning from that model, whether it's a flood, whatever it is, whether it's a fire, how do you recover in a way that's equitable and that's smart? We've worked to expand access to voting when the state is not allowing a mail-in ballot for everyone, where we've at least made sure to send one to every single person over 65, made elections as secure as possible because we don't want anybody to challenge the results coming out of the largest county in Texas. And there's so much work left to be done, but we have the energy and we have the vision. And that hasn't gone unnoticed because folks recognize, and particularly Republicans recognize, what happens when progressive leadership shows results. It means that people want to participate, that people want more creative, ambitious people in power, that progressive leadership means compassionate, smart government that gets things done. And so I've not failed to notice the attacks. We've had media personalities like Sean Hannity and Michael Berry and mainstream Republicans like Dan Patrick and Rick Perry criticize the work we're doing here because they're scared. They know what we're building. And that's why it's so important for folks to continue to support the candidates that form part of Run for Something, that are really changing the face of power, that are realizing that we don't need to change people's minds. We've got to change the people in power, and we can do that. And I know that it's tiring and we're all exhausted. Amanda, you and Ross have been supporting me since 2017, probably 2016. I mean, it's been a long time in this fight, and we're not done fighting. And so many of them, the people on right now, have been fighting even before then, and we've had to go through disappointments, and we've recognized what a long road is ahead of us, and we're dealing with this pandemic. But more than ever, it is so crucial, and people are seeing the impact of strong leadership at the local level. So this, for me, is not just about my community, it's about Texas, it's about the country, it's about an example of what good government can be. And I think there's just no better way to do that than through these young leaders who are not tied to the powers that be, who are not focused on, special interests. And so, look, I see the challenge, but we have to keep fighting. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who's persevering. And I'm so excited to be part of this journey with you guys.
Thank you so much, Lina. We have time. I know you have a tough schedule tonight, and so you're not going to be able to join us for the Q&A later this evening. But if you have time for one or two questions, someone wants to know, what do you think isn't being talked about enough right now? What do you wish more people were paying attention to?
Oof. I mean, in terms of broader policy areas, I think obviously this is exacerbating, like any disaster, this exacerbates all of the fissures and the inequities in our community. And so you can take your pick, you know, whether it's access to transportation, folks who can't get to a testing site because they don't have a car, whether it is access to technology, folks that can't do online learning because they don't have a computer, or maybe they have a computer, but they don't have a hotspot, they don't have internet. And maybe they got a hotspot from the government, but there's no cell tower where they live, so they still can't get a connectivity. Whether it's access to health insurance, all of this is becoming very clear. But look, something that I wish people talked about more was the terrible consequences of mixed messages. There's a lot we don't know about this virus. There are questions about exactly how long it lives on surfaces and exactly what it does to certain categories of people and whether you have, are immune or not immune after you've had it. But we do know that it spreads through close contact. And in communities like mine, where we're seeing incredibly high numbers, to still have folks at different levels of government pretending like it's even an option to have bars open, to have, right now here we have restaurants open, the water parks are open, you can have any size indoor event. As long as it's indoors, it can be as big as you want it to be. Those kinds of mixed messages are what led us to where we are today, where we're not in a position to reopen the economy sustainably, where we're not in a position to reopen schools even a little bit here. And so that's really sad. And I think it's important for us to shine a spotlight on the fact that this politically convenient flip-flopping has a real impact in the lives of people. And that's why we need leaders that are consistent. If you can't even keep track of what you said last week or the week before, you should not be in power. We need folks who are following the science, whether it's because of a pandemic or just the data and the numbers on whatever issue. We need real honest conversations and we need consistency, because otherwise, with good reason, we confuse the public and we don't make progress.
I think that's exactly right. One other question for you, Judge Hidalgo. Jamie Wu wants to know, her parents live in Harris County and are part of the very Chinese immigrant community there, a very large community there, excuse me. They tend to lean a little bit more conservative. What suggestions do you have to connecting with some of these more traditional immigrant communities, especially in Houston, to vote and support progressive candidates like yourself?
Results. I think the most powerful tool we have is showing results. When we came into office, we had budget season within a few weeks, and we got one page per department, $5 billion budget. And it was like a little cover page of how much we were gonna invest for each department. No explanation as to why, no explanation as to what programs those departments were carrying out, how the programs did in the prior year, how those programs stacked up to best practices, nothing like that. We are trying to build performance-based budgeting. We are trying to be smart about, if you care about fiscal responsibility, we're there. If you care about the economy, we're the ones that are saying we need to reopen sustainably. It's not about wishing the virus away and then it'll go away. Whether it's the future of energy, we have to be realistic. We can't fall behind and let the world pass us by. We got to look at energy more broadly. And so I think particularly at the local level, these conversations are very practical. Expanding access to the vote. Look, we know over 65 leans a certain direction is probably not progressive for the most part, but yet we're sending those mail-in ballots. If that's the only population we can send them to, that's the only population we will send them to. We're doing everything we can. And so to show folks of all political stripes that when you have leaders with a strong moral compass in government, that they deliver results is important. Even campaign funding, Amanda, when I first was elected, there were so many folks that were calling me up that had not been willing to help me during the campaign and suddenly wanted to do my fundraising. And I was just, I was like, okay, great. And why, what's happening? And it turns out that in these local positions, you get your funds from the folks who do business with the county, who do business with the city. And look, there may be or may not be a quid pro quo, but fundamentally, it just doesn't look good. And it gives you, it gives me anyway, an uncomfortable feeling. And when I said to these folks, I just don't feel comfortable doing that, everybody thought I was crazy. Well, how are you going to fundraise? And then these same people said, never mind, I'm not going to do your fundraising anymore. It's too hard. And so, but I think that's refreshing to people, you know, and folks that I've met, whether they're, you know, more traditional, more conservative or not, I'm going to stick with my values, my priorities. But I do think that this kind of thing transcends, you know, progressive or not, is look, I don't want there to be an appearance of a conflict of interest. And that's where, you know, these incredible organizations make such a big difference. And yeah, I don't think that's political. It's just about good governance. And that's what you do when you bring people into government who aren't in it because they've spent their whole lives trying to see how much power they can accumulate, because they saw a problem in their community. They tried to address it from the outside, it didn't work. Let's try the inside, and we're all hungry for change. So we've all got to do this right now.
Amazing. One final question before you have to go. Many of the people, in fact, most on tonight's call are not in Houston. Is there one thing they can do to help you do your job better? Is there anything they can do to support you right now?
Oof, maybe, you know, if we're going to be going through this hard a time where we're seeing, you know, 65% of our hospitalizations are Hispanics, you know, hovers from week to week, 65, 60, 55, back to 65, where only 44% of the population is Hispanic. We're having these stories where neighboring counties are trying to send patients to our hospital. It's the largest medical center in the world, and we don't have room for them. They've had to send their patients, you know, to Dallas. We're not being able to open schools. I want to at least be a word of warning to other communities that there really is no wishing away this virus, and there isn't a dichotomy between the economy and health. You know, these things, we have to find a way to coexist. Other communities have done so, and that's the way we do it for the long term. And it's not a way to celebrate falsely, but it's the truth, and it's smart. And so I just hope that folks take this lesson and don't make the same mistake. And other than that, you know, just continuing to support this kind of leadership all throughout the country. I mean, the fact that these folks are taking these steps on homelessness, you know, on police and schools, it helps me here, because then I can point to, I say, hey, if they did over there, why can't we do it here? And so, you know, ultimately we're all connected in this new wave of better governance. And so it's just really exciting, and I'm grateful for that.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to spend with us, Judge Hidalgo. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Bye, Lina. Next up, we're going to have two incredible speakers, and then we'll open it back up for Q&A. I am so excited first to introduce Josh Pauly. Josh has a bachelor's and a master's of education from the University of Minnesota. He got his start in education by teaching in the Minnesota Public Schools. He's the former executive director of Books on Wings, a nonprofit that provided culturally relevant books to underserved students in grades K through 3. He also founded a nonprofit that worked to increase access and engagement in the local political process. Currently, he works for Sanford Harmony, supporting districts around the country adopt and implement social emotional learning curriculum. He's here tonight as a director for the Minneapolis School Board, where he's chair of the Superintendent Evaluation Committee and chair of the Policy Committee. His work draws on his own background growing up in a single-parent home and being a first-generation college student working to afford tuition. He's coming to us live from the basement of his South Minneapolis home, where he lives with his wife, Megan, and his nice dog. I am so excited for Josh to be here to tell us his story and a little bit about what he's been doing in Minneapolis, especially around police reform. Josh, take it away.
Thank you, Amanda. And thanks, everybody. I really appreciate everything that I've heard so far tonight. This really energizes me in a time where there's a lot of things that, kind of suck that out of you. So I just think being on a city council or school board, it's so much more difficult than people realize. Many folks in these local elected positions, many don't even get paid, or if they do, it isn't a livable wage. So then you're working an additional full-time job, you're relying on a partner, or maybe you come from a wealthy family. You have to worry about making money. But that dilutes the pool of potential candidates, leaving us with disproportionately an older, whiter, and more affluent folks in positions of power in our local communities. I think I just saw a couple weeks ago that the average age of school board members in America is 59. So we're talking about folks who were born around 1960. And in many cases, that leads to reinforcing systems that give even greater support for those in our communities who already have privilege and power. Young folks like us have to step up as leaders. We have to believe in ourselves and band together. And it's more personal at the local level, right? Local electeds don't have the same staffing ability. I don't have any staff members. There's not necessarily the national television coverage to revel in. People, They know who you are, where you live. They come, talk to your office hours and open meetings, or they bug you at your house, like in my cases. But advocacy at the local level directly impacts you and your neighbors. Caring about local issues shows a deep concern for those in your backyard. This could be fixing potholes, removing racial covenants from housing agreements, funding mental health resources, or fighting for universal health care. Since local leaders often serve as feeders into state and national politics, your local vote could have a greater impact than you know. So if you don't like the tone or the tenor of national politicians, I would really recommend consider rallying behind candidates of character and civility on the local level who could someday become your state or national representatives. In my community, Ilhan Omar used to be the policy aide for the city council member in my ward, and now she's my congresswoman. I think there's no more direct impact that you can have on the lives of the community members than running for local office. And even if you never hold elected office, your neighborhoods desperately need engaged voters. So voting down ballot or flipping your ballot over, in the case of my community, talking to your neighbor about park boards, school boards, county commissioners, things like that. And when you think about donating to campaigns, $50 to a school board or a state representative can have an amazing impact. And thinking about my role as a leader in education, the COVID-19 epidemic and the associated school closures have revealed to the broad public the profound inequities in the lives of children. Inequities that have always been there, have always significantly impacted school success, but are seldom acknowledged and sometimes not even perceived by those not facing the same burden. Now these inequities are front page news, right? Coverage about food deficits, adequate access to health care, including mental health, problems with housing stability, like Hidalgo just mentioned, inadequate access to technology and the internet. Those of us in education know these problems have existed forever. This newfound public awareness of pervasive inequities, I hope, will create a sense of urgency in the public domain, and we as local leaders need to drive that. So we should take advantage of the current sense of urgency to do something. We know there's a gap in opportunities in our schools and in our communities. We should be asking, why not construct a system that gives everyone opportunity to be successful? We can talk about how spending dollars is an expression of values. Many people say that, don't tell me your values, show me your budget. And that's one of the reasons that some of us on my school board have been fighting for so long to remove cops from our schools. We don't have funding for some of the things we value. So why would we spend $1.3 million a year on funding cops to be in our schools? And it could be in other places like policies. So in regards to student placement policies and practices in Minneapolis public schools, currently almost 95% of white families receive their first or second choice in Minneapolis. Now that number drops to less than 50% for families of color, and that's unacceptable. These numbers are based on a student placement system not designed to be accessible for all the families in our city. So based on feedback from communities of color and those of our communities that have been marginalized, we're overhauling both our student placement practices and policies to allow a more equitable and accessible placement process for students and families. And this is going to have a profound impact on our community, on our city. And my role as a school board member impacts education and other large systems. We have an initiative with our city that provides housing for some of our families. I think in a couple of weeks, we're going to sell a building that we own for $1 to the county in August so they can build a shelter for homeless women and mothers. I get to connect with state representatives on increasing funding for community-based mental health resources and internet access so the students, the things that they need to have an equitable distance learning experience. And I am also so fortunate that Ilhan Omar is my congresswoman, and she listens to us on what young people in our community need to be successful. And I think it's really important for me to call out that George Floyd was killed by the police in Minneapolis, my home in the city where I serve on the Board of Education. Across the country, our communities are in pain as a result of the persistent and blatant disregard for Black lives. People are demanding justice, and each of us have a role in achieving that. School board members across the country shouldn't be worried about, staying in their lane, and must instead work with student activists and those leading so much of this momentum to defund police departments. In early June, I wrote a resolution, and our board passed the resolution directing Minneapolis Public Schools to terminate its contract with the police and cease all future negotiations. We cannot partner with organizations that do not see the humanity in our students. We cannot be neutral in situations of injustice. And though this does not reduce the pain that our community is enduring, hopefully this resolution can be a small step towards the dramatic changes that are needed in our city and beyond. The resolution was a result of not just our board leadership, but of youth advocacy. And though we moved swiftly to respond, it's not the change that happened overnight. Minneapolis Public Schools has made incremental change over the years. Last January, our board passed a resolution warning the police actions were harming our program, advocating for the police department to make changes to line with the values of our district, and telling our staff to reduce funding for policing in the future, but it wasn't enough. So this youth-driven effort to remove the Minneapolis Police Department from our places of learning finally happened as a result of local community organizing. The changes in Minneapolis public schools are a victory for our students, and it was the board's failure, honestly, to not listen and take action sooner. So we are now seeing similar resolutions and discussions all across America. Students and organizers can advocate, and it's a huge part. But if we as leaders in positions of power, if we don't act, if we waste their hard work, energy, and desire for change, that's unacceptable. And our system has failed in so many times, in so many ways. And I was close to failing too. Every time I was kind of tempted to stay in my lane. Those in positions of authority and privilege need to use it to further shared goals, however uncomfortable doing it may initially be. In carrying out this work as a white man, it's important for me to look past my own personal privilege. It's true that sometimes there's a voice in my head that questions radical change. But the reality is our governing culture is laden with racism at every turn, and it will take radical change to fix that. We need to make hard choices and take unprecedented bold moves, and we need to do that over and over again. As appalling as what we've witnessed the past few months is, none of this is new. The criminal justice system and systemic racism have been killing people of color for centuries. However, the spotlight has also never been brighter than it is now, and I'm hopeful that this newfound public awareness, new partnerships with organizations, and an emerging crop of passionate leaders will create a sense of urgency in our community that lead to lasting change. So I'm really thankful for organizations like Run for Something that fight for progressive leaders looking to make change in the communities that we all serve, that our communities deserve. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Josh. The work that you are doing in Minneapolis is really remarkable, and we are so glad to be on your team. I know folks have a couple questions for Josh, and we're going to get back to them after you meet our other speaker for this evening. So we'll shoo you away and bring up Senator Emily Randall. Emily represents District 26 in the Washington State Legislature. Run for Something alum, she was first elected in 2018. A second-generation Kitsap County native, she is the daughter and granddaughter of veterans, union workers, and educators. She was the first in her family to attend a four-year college and then worked for her alma mater, the Children's Hospital of Boston, San Francisco AIDS Foundation, and Planned Parenthood. She is now the chair of the Senate Higher Education and Workforce Development Committee and vice chair of the Senate Health and Long-Term Care Committee. I'm so excited for her to be here tonight to tell us a little bit more about the work she's doing in Washington State and to share her story. Senator, take it away.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I feel so honored to be able to share space with all of you watching tonight, and especially to get to learn more about Judge Hidalgo and about Josh and the incredible work that they're doing in their communities. You know, being a part of the Run for Something cohort with whom I was endorsed, and the continual folks who are added into the family has really given me life, both during the campaign and now as an elected official. I get to feel a little less alone in this wild ride that I'm on. So I'll tell you a little bit about me and my why I ran and what it was like, and then what we've been able to accomplish over the last two sessions that I have been in the Senate in Olympia. I decided to run around the same time I think that Amanda decided to found Run for Something. I was working for Planned Parenthood at the time of the 2016 election. I had been knocking on doors in southern New Hampshire on a field deployment in an area of the country that looks so much like the area of Washington State where I grew up, rural and purple, and yet I felt so much hope about the conversations I was having with folks at the doors and the kind of leadership that we were on the verge of electing. I drove down to Wellesley College after the polls closed in Nashua to join thousands of my classmates and fellow alumni and students to watch one of our own be elected. And then she wasn't. And the most amazing party that I was a part of felt like the saddest funeral that I had ever been to. And I looked around, you know, the field house and all of these incredible women. You know, Madeleine Albright had Skyped in, and, you know, there were judges and there were executives and there were community organizers and just rad people who were coming together to hope for change. And I knew as a first generation college grad who was able to graduate because of the incredible generosity of generations of women who came before me, that I had to use that privilege to make bigger change. I'd been a fundraiser for 10 years, raising money for education and healthcare and, supporting women and kids and families. And I knew I couldn't raise enough money to get us out of the mess that we were in. I knew that systemic change was only possible if I worked in the system. I had been working from the outside. I knew that there were other ways to do it, but I knew that for me, the next step was to make that change by running for office. I didn't know exactly what office yet, but pretty quickly I began to research the options. And as soon as there were run for something calls that I could join, I dialed in. I remember walking home from my office to my apartment and listening to Amanda say that when you decide what office to run for, you should think about what kind of change you want to make. And that's how you decide where the right role for you is. And for me, I knew that healthcare was important, that making sure that folks were not stripped of the access that we had worked so hard to get for them. I knew that education equity was important. I knew what it was like to be a first-generation student, a woman of color, outsider in a Ivy League-esque campus. And I wanted to make the opportunity that I was given possible for so many young people. I knew that Washington State had a history of leading in healthcare and education. I really learned to be an activist because I was 7 when I had a sister born with developmental disabilities, and Olivia was such a gift to my family. And I also saw how my family struggled to navigate a complicated system, to get Olivia the care that she needed, to get Olivia the access to education. And when Olivia was born, my family had good insurance, but it wouldn't have covered everything that we needed for her. She needed expensive equipment and, specialists in big cities and a feeding tube and supplies and pharmaceuticals that would have cost us so much to buy out of pocket. But Washington State in 1993 led the country in expanding Medicaid. And so I knew that we had a strong history in my home state of standing up when our partners at the federal level were not doing their job. We're not looking out for our neighbors in the way that they should be. I knew that we could lead here in this Washington, and then that's how I decided to run for the legislature. As a Planned Parenthood alumna, queer, Latina, I, faced some barriers in getting the support that allowed me to win. I remember the first local politico who I talked to when I thought that I wanted to run for the House, who told me, I think you might be too much for your district. Maybe rethink it. And, that wasn't the first time that I had heard that maybe I was too much. I think all the women on this call, all the people of color on this call, the queer folks on this call have heard that time and again. And in that moment, it lit a fire under me. I knew that there were so many other people like me in my community who had been told that they were too much, who had been told it wasn't their time, who had been told that they didn't belong in the system, whether explicitly or implicitly. And for my neighbors, I was even more committed. I wanted to lift up their voices, to shout from the rooftops the needs that we had and figure out how we could work together to solve the problems we are facing, to make sure that our community members had the tools that they needed to build the biggest and brightest futures for themselves and their families. I, as Amanda said, come from a family of military folks and union members who were committed to looking after each other, who were committed to working together to make change, whether that was, at a church fundraiser or as a volunteer firefighter or, as preschool board president. The people in my family showed up for our neighbors, and I saw my neighbors do the same for each other. But our legislators were not representing us with that spirit. I come from a district that, until I was elected, had been for the past few years represented by 3 Republicans, We have joint House and Senate districts, and both of our House members and our senator were not only Republicans, but they were far-right Republicans. So it was only because of a community and a coalition and bringing in all the voices that we were able to flip that seat. It was because of the support of Run for Something and folks like you who were contributing to the leadership of new, young, queer, brown women and people across the country that we were able to make that change. And, you know, over these past 2 sessions, we have done so much. We established the country's first public option in healthcare. We created a work group to move towards universal coverage. We banned discrimination in reproductive health for trans folks. We made sure that young people in our public schools were not discriminated against because they were young trans folks. We have strengthened our voting protections in a state that was already mail-in ballot, but we've paid postage. We have increased drop boxes. We have made sure that people can participate in bigger, bolder, more meaningful ways. And I cannot wait to keep tackling the next challenges alongside my colleagues and a new crop of folks who will be elected in November. So thank you for your commitment to making leadership change and investing in Josh and me and Lina and so many others. And I'm really happy to be able to share this space with you today.
Thank you, Emily. That was really beautiful to hear your story. And I don't think people realize your election came down to like 300 votes in a manual recount. Is that right?
101.
101, excuse me. Excuse me. Oh my God. I remember watching that and thinking, woo, that seems like it's a headache waiting to happen. So if folks have any questions for Josh or for Emily, for Senator Randall, excuse me, to please drop them in the Q&A. Josh, there is one here for you from Billy Freeland about any advice on how to advocate for school desegregation and more affordable housing in a way that can convince those who are content with the status quo content.
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's something that we've actually been going through as a community. We did this kind of district redesign, and one of the big things that the community said was they wanted increased integration, but we live in a segregated city. And so the idea of increasing integration in a segregated city, what white folks thought was like, oh, well, you'll just send the kids of color to my school, right? You like bus them across the city and like, you'll make it convenient for me. So having those conversations, it's really about having the data and talking about like, what does that mean? Like, who are you centering these conversations around? Where are you putting value? But I think that's the best thing. And I think that's what Judge Hidalgo talked about is like, when people have the information, the facts and the information are on our side for all these progressive and positive changes.
Excuse me. Emily, do you have anything on that as well?
You know, we have, you know, a different structure, I think, than in some places of the country. We have 256 school districts, and you don't have the same school lottery system. You go to your neighborhood school. But what we have been struggling with is making funding more equitable across districts. Because they're property tax funded and they're bound by district for the most part. Over the last couple of years, we've made some real strides in flipping that funding model to make sure that the state budget is allocated more equally.
Amazing. And Emily, can you talk a little bit about the work you did around women's health and reproductive health? It was really revolutionary in Washington.
Thank you. So I came in to the legislature after one session after we flipped control from a Republican to Democrat in the Senate. And the previous year, we had accomplished a ton, including reproductive parity, which requires that any insurance that covers maternity care and OBGYN more broadly must also cover abortion access. We'd also built great access to 12 months of birth control and no copay contraception, but there was more to do. And the bill that I worked on, Reproductive Health Access for All, ensured that when the trans folks who shared their stories were discriminated against, whether in their doctor's office or from their insurer, that we could fix that. Now, some of the stories we heard were appalling, like a trans woman who broke her arm on a softball team, went to the doctor who said that they wouldn't treat her because they don't cover transition related care. And if she hadn't transitioned, she wouldn't have been playing on a women's softball team and she wouldn't have broken her arm. So the mental gymnastics there that folks had to go through in order to deny people healthcare was untenable. Even some of my more conservative colleagues on the healthcare committee had a hard time wrapping their heads around that story. We also saw folks who, needed treatment for ovarian or uterine cancer, but were denied coverage by their insurer because, their gender markers were male, and their insurer said, well, you can't possibly have a uterus. The folks who bravely stood up to tell their stories in front of the committee and in the media were the reason that we were able to make that change. What we weren't able to pass in the bill that had originally been included was what we call a Take Charge lookalike program. So Take Charge is a federal program that covers folks' reproductive health care, contraception, but is inaccessible to immigrant communities, particularly folks who are undocumented. And we tried to build a state program to do that. We were eventually able to get it through the budget, but it wasn't something that some of my colleagues in the House were comfortable voting on the House floor. And it was really heartbreaking to see some of the discrimination and that still exists even under Democratic control. But we're electing great new folks over this next cycle, and I'm hopeful of what we'll be able to accomplish to continue to extend access.
Awesome. I'd love to ask both of you, and starting with you, Josh, what is the biggest challenge you have faced as a young elected official, either personally, professionally, or both?
Well, that's a good question. Biggest challenge. I mean, on the Minneapolis school board, I'm about 2 decades younger than the next youngest person. And I think there's kind of this unspoken thought that if you're not old, then you don't have a lot of knowledge, you don't have a lot of lived experiences, or you must not know what you're talking about, right? You're in your late 20s or early 30s. And so I think really pushing back against that, and I'm a millennial, and that's the largest group of community members who live in Minneapolis are millennials. And so I think, representing that voice and that perspective, the next generation of families, if you want to think about it that way, or the largest group of taxpayers for people who really want to talk about fiduciary responsibility. I think you just got to turn around and be an asset. But I think people just assume that you don't know as much. And I definitely felt pressure initially. Like I had to know everything about every topic. Like I had to do so much research. I had to have, so many note cards with me with everything. So I was good to go because I'm not going to feed into your incorrect stereotype. So I think that's what I would say.
So similar, so many plus ones there. I'm the youngest member of the Senate, not by quite as much. I have a couple of colleagues one colleague in their 30s. But it has been a challenge when you can see on, either your colleagues' faces, their mistrust or disbelief, or even more often for me is lobbyists and advocates who come into my office, old white men for the most part, and we ask if they can call me Emily or even just call me Emily, which that's my name, it's fine, but they don't do it to other members, and you can see the difference. And when folks second guess you or assume that you'll do something for them because you're younger or you're a woman, it's a challenge. So I've been trying to figure out ways to navigate asserting my power that feels comfortable and true to me, because I am collaborative and I am a people person and I love to get to know folks, but that's been a struggle.
I'd another question from another attendee tonight. Each of you are examples of how important it is not just to have any Democrat, but to have really good Democrats and good progressives. I was wondering if you could talk to the experience of being in a place where your party is in the majority and what it feels like to get things done or not get things done, even when you're sharing sort of a partisanship label. Senator Randall, if you could start.
Yeah. So one example that I'll share that comes to mind for me is this past session, we were working on voter rights restoration. Washington is leading many states in ensuring that folks, once they're out of custody, can have their voting rights restored, but there are still so many barriers. And we had a great bill that would have allowed folks, so many more folks to vote. And we were so confident after, many a tough conversation that we brought the bill to the floor. And it was on the floor that we lost the last vote we needed among our own caucus. And the bill was voted down. And I remember, crying with colleagues in the wings and staff members and advocates and being so disillusioned with a system that, continues to deny civil rights to so many of our neighbors. And, the work ahead of us is bringing folks along or bringing new folks in. There's a lot of education and coaxing that happens, in the caucus room. And it is an honor to do it for the right reasons, but it's also hard.
I think that's a great question. And I would definitely agree with what I just heard from Senator Randall in so many ways. On the Minneapolis School Board, there are 9 of us, and we are all endorsed Democrats. So, we're all technically left-leaning, but we had a meeting on Tuesday, and just as an example, we were talking about, distance learning and school closures and the things associated with that. And one of my colleagues was comparing COVID-19 to influenza. And right, we're both Democrats. We both believe in supposedly similar things, but that doesn't align with what I think about as being like a progressive informed Democrat. So it is difficult. And I think you try to get done what you can, you try to find allies, how do you build coalitions? But I mean, even within, I live in a very progressive, Minneapolis is a progressive community, right? We have Ilhan Omar, everyone at the city council is a Democrat, all our county commissioners, but you've got, certain people who supported Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and certain people who supported, Biden and others. And there are differences there and they're very real. And so I think to me, the biggest thing that's made me realize is like, I need to help recruit and support new colleagues on the school board. And so I've taken a lot of what I've learned from Run for Something and my experience running as a candidate to, support great people. And there's a couple that are going to be elected in November, I think, and it's going to help us have a majority to do the things that we want to do. And I think that's one of the most powerful things is, taking what we've learned and using that to kind of better the movement and support the things that really need to be done in our communities.
Amazing. I want to end this on an uplifting note. Can each of you in, let's call it like 2 tweets worth of words or so, tell us what's giving you hope? What's sparking joy for you right now? Josh, why don't you go first?
What's giving you? I think young people. I think I see what the next generation is doing. Like, yeah, I'm a millennial, and we're doing some good things. But I think people that are younger than me, I think our students, I think the things that I hear in youth-based organizations in our community, we have a student rep on our board. And the things I've heard from our student representatives the last 2 years are so powerful and so right. It's the right stuff. And it's, I think back to people talking about, that's how we used to think about something. And you ended up being on like the right or the wrong side of history. I think about so many things that we're good with that are on the wrong side. And I just see that this next generation is doing the right stuff. And I just want to support them and amplify them. And I think I went over the 2 tweets, but the next generation, that's what gives me hope.
So same. I just got off a call before this with faculty and staff of color at our 34 community and technical colleges, talking about how we can fight racism on college campuses, how we can make our learning communities safer and more successful for both students and faculty and staff of color. And so many good ideas, so much commitment, so much fire, and also, you know, challenge to work through. But one faculty member lifted up an idea that some high school students he's been working with brought to him about creating like a Black Students Bill of Rights. And we scheduled a meeting for next week for me to meet with those students, and I cannot wait. I love it when young people bring us bill ideas, and I love finding opportunities to bring them into the legislative process, because who better to tell us how education policy should be changed than the folks who are experiencing it right now, or who have recently experienced what it means to be a student.
That's amazing. Point of personal privilege, I will say both of you give me so much hope, and hearing from Judge Hidalgo earlier, it is just, and I say this all the time, it is incredible to be a part of the experience with someone as you go from normal person, from teacher, from activist, from student to candidate to elected official who is so clearly delivering so much good for people. It is the best part of this work is getting to hear your stories and getting to support you however we can. So I want to say thank you both to Senator Randall and to Josh for joining us tonight. For everyone who jumped on the call this evening, it means so much to us to have your support and your generosity. I know you contributed to be here this evening, or hopefully you did. If not, and even if you did so, Run for Something is trying to make up a pretty big gap in our budget because of the cancellation of travel and in-person events. So if you're able to give or give again, runforsomething.net/build is where to go. You're going to get an email tomorrow from me that has links to information to how to support Senator Randall, how to help Josh, how to follow more on what Judge Hidalgo is doing in Texas, as well as how you can get further involved with Run for Something, both helping us build our organization to be sustainable for the long term and helping us recruit more candidates to elect more people like Senator Randall, Josh, Judge Hidalgo, and everyone else we're working with across the country. So thank you again. Thank you to everyone who joined. Thank you again to our host committee, and have a wonderful rest of your night, everybody, and a good weekend.